Black women have always been the canary in the coal mine. Black women have faced racism and sexism in this country that was built on racism and sexism. And when we tried to talk about our plights, no one really heard us. We were sounding the alarm about racism and sexism and the intersection of the two, and how we got pushed down, how our voices were minimized. No one took us seriously. This Anita Hill versus Clarence Thomas happened back in 1991, where she took him to court for sexual harassment. She was not listened to by the Black community that thought that a Black man needed a chance, and by other groups that thought that she shouldn't be talking about sexual harassment because they didn't really take that type of thing seriously. Now here we are, 2025, some 30 years later, and these issues are still not being addressed. Over 300,000 Black women got let go because of this administration. Black women are sounding the alarm about how these things have been impacting us. But it's not until other people start to get impacted that folks think that there's a problem, because people don't listen to Black women. I'm going to talk about this Anita Hill conversation. I'm going to come back to that. We're also going to talk about how Ronald Reagan used Linda Taylor, who was actually a white woman, to demonize Black women. It was coded, welfare queen was coded to mean Black people or Black women. And so that's how you get a whole demographic, like some 40 years later, still attaching needing food stamps to Black people. That's why so many people were dancing like, oh, y'all gonna get your benefits taken away. But yet, white people, poor white people, are getting their SNAP benefits pulled as well, because they thought it was just the other people that were going to be impacted. No, you're poor too. And Linda Taylor was white to begin with. And this is their problem. They always look at Black people, Black women, as the least of all people. That's the reason why they don't mind us being targeted. But you target us, you target all women. You target us, you target all non-white people. It just took a little while before the target started shifting to include more people. But Black women were at the forefront taking those body blows because no one saw us as human enough to be protected. This is an article from the New York Times. I'm going to pull pieces from this. Now, this is before New York Times was putting out dumb headlines about how women ruined the workplace because women stopped accepting sexual harassment. It's wild how you come to 2025 and they're writing that. But you go back 30 years and women are still facing sexual harassment and discrimination in the workforce. And women had to fight for the right to not be harassed in the workforce. And I guess that's how women ruined the workplace. Anyways, let's look at this New York Times article. I just find it ironic that this is the one that I chose, where the New York Times put out that dumb headline, that dumb op-ed, acting like women were the problem. Anita Hill made history in 1991 when she testified before Congress about the sexual harassment she said she had experienced while she was an aide to Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court nominee who had been her supervisor at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. With the advent of the Me Too movement, she has been speaking out again. She most recently made news when she criticized presidential candidate and former VP Joe Biden for his handling of the Thomas hearings. She spoke with Jessica Bennett, gender editor at the New York Times, at New Rules Summit on Women in Power last week. The excerpts from her conversation have been edited and condensed. And I'm just going to pull some of this. I'm not going to do the whole article. Right here, she says, it wasn't until many years later, after the 1991 trial, it wasn't until many years later when the documentary about you came out that I really truly learned your story. But I want to ask you, how did 1991 change the course of your life? Great question. Let's see. Anita Hill says, well, it's almost impossible to know. It's been almost 30 years now, so it's hard to even remember exactly what was going on in my life before. This is the new normal for me. I had not planned to be sitting in front of an audience talking with the New York Times 30 years ago. But I will say I am still a teacher and I do teach at a university. It's my career. I maintain that, although the content of what I teach is now different. The emphasis that I now have on equality was not the emphasis that my work was taking back in 1991. I was actually a contracts professor, a contracts and commercial law person. I did some work around equality issues, but it wasn't the focus of my life. But the thing that I have to say is that what I have done is I've combined the old with the new. So when I look at equality, I also look at economic inequality. And so the background is always there in terms of my profession, in terms of being a public figure. Absolutely no. I would rather have spent my life in front of my computer or in a library. In 2014, Anita Hill was a professor, and many of her students didn't know her history at the time. And she's asked the question about being profiled and then, having to address all of that history that some of her students weren't aware of. And this is her answer. She says, in 2014, I think we were really coming back to the issues that were opened up in the hearing in a brand new way. I won't go all the way back and through all of the details of 1991, but I will remind you that after the hearings, 70%, or at least a pretty wide majority of people, thought that I had perjured myself. Most of the people polled, regardless of race, regardless of gender, believed that Clarence Thomas should be confirmed for the Supreme Court. Many people viewing the hearings didn't even realize that sexual harassment was something that was actionable, that they could file a complaint about. They had no idea what the concept was about. So we're at a very different point. In the decades following the hearings, that changed. It changed because people started telling their stories. We started filing complaints. We had lawsuits that were filed, and the public became much more aware. There was still an issue of connecting that awareness with action, and I wanted people to understand with this new awareness what had actually happened in 1991. The film made that possible. Part of the reporter's question gets cut off, but she says the year after your testimony, filings to the EEOC around sexual harassment went up 73%. Some of the working women's group, like 9 to 5, reported their phone lines ringing off the hook with women, largely women, saying, "You mean this is illegal? You mean I can do something about this?" And of course, in the year after, a record number of women ran for Congress. Why did it take so long for Me Too to happen? I'm going to answer this as a Black woman who watched this. Anita Hill's situation didn't take off because she was a Black woman being harassed and people didn't take it as seriously. Now, Alyssa Milano is not even the person that started Me Too. She wasn't. It was Tarana Burke. But since Alyssa Milano was a white woman and more of a celebrity, it took off because people will tend to listen to white women more so than Black women because people don't listen to Black women. But now let's look at what Ms. Hill says. All right, so Ms. Hill says, because I think we had to come to the terms with a number of facts. We had to come to terms with the fact that people really didn't know that this was illegal. I mean, it had been so normalized in our workplaces that people just assumed this is the way life is. And then we had to start thinking about what kinds of things do we need to do. And I think the first approach was to say, let's change behavior. That's all we have to do. We've got to, get a few bad apples out of the system, and that's going to be enough. Then we realized that wasn't enough, that a few bad apples really was not entirely the problem, that what we had were cultural problems and cultural acceptance of it, and that around the cultural acceptance were structures that were built to support it, and that includes some legal structures that were built. The non-disclosure agreements that were put into place, the forced mediation around claims of abuse in the workplace, those were things that we just sort of had thought of as neutral, but were actually contributing greatly to an ongoing problem. So we really didn't understand the complexity of it. And the Me Too movement came about because we started to understand the complexity of it. And I will say, because the press started covering it. And if you don't have all those things coming together, you're not going to get this kind of reckoning that actually engages people and puts together out there the stories and the analysis that will make for a Me Too movement and that invites other people to come in and engage the conversation. Having social media definitely helped. All right, I'm going to make a part 2 where I'm going to address Linda Taylor and Ronald Reagan. People love themselves some Ronald Reagan. He gave us trickle-down economics, and all the poor people just got so rich because of trickle-down money. It happened. Okay, maybe it didn't. He gave us Make America Great Again because he wanted to send us back to the 50s before women and black folks were human. And then that was co-opted by Donald Trump, who still wants to send us back to a time before women and black folks and other colored folks were human. And he also gave us welfare queen. And he also attached that to black women, even though Linda Taylor, who his little story was based off of, was actually a white woman. And we haven't been able to shake the welfare queen stereotype. Ronald Reagan really told this story, and it was solidified because racism and sexism, it built up America. And so black women were always a great target. And so that's the reason why when all these SNAP benefits started getting snatched, people were happy about it. Like, yay, now you lazy people will stop getting your nails done and your lashes done, and you lazy people will go get a job. But the original welfare queen was a white woman. So let's talk about Ronald Reagan and Linda Taylor. This is an old article. It still gives us the history of this. Linda Taylor, Ronald Reagan's welfare queen, was real and white. Former President Ronald Reagan, during his time in office, often attacked welfare, and many say at the expense of black women living in poverty. He spoke about a welfare queen who has become part of this nation's political lore. Journalists couldn't find her. Liberals claimed that she didn't exist, but she did. According to an in-depth report by Slate's Josh Levin, Linda Taylor had dozens of aliases and a rap sheet longer than an arm, but she wasn't black. She was white. So I went and clicked into Slate's article that talks about Linda Taylor. The welfare queen. In the 70s, Ronald Reagan villainized a Chicago woman for bilking the government. Her other sins, including possible kidnapping and murders, were far worse. Here she is again, and I guess this is why they might have coded her as a black woman, because she's kind of dressed like a blaxploitation character, something like a pimp or something. Ronald Reagan loved to tell stories. When he ran for president in 1976, many of Reagan's anecdotes converged on a single point. The welfare state is broken, and I'm the man to fix it. On the trail, the Republican candidate told a tale about a fancy public housing complex with a gym and a swimming pool. There was also someone in California, he'd explained incredulously, who supported herself with food stamps while learning the art of witchcraft. And in stump speech after stump speech, Reagan regaled his supporters with the story of an Illinois woman whose feats of deception were too amazing to be believed. In Chicago, they found a woman who holds the record. The former California governor declared at a campaign rally in January 1976, she used 80 names, 30 addresses, 15 telephone numbers to collect food stamps, Social Security, veterans benefits for 4 non-existent deceased veteran husbands, as well as welfare. Her tax-free cash income alone has been running $150,000 a year. As soon as he quoted that dollar amount, the crowd gasped. They probably clutched their pearls too. 4 decades later, Reagan's soliloquies on welfare fraud are often remembered as shameless demagoguery. Many accounts report that Reagan coined the term welfare queen and that this woman in Chicago was a fictional character. In 2007, the New York Times' Paul Krugman wrote that the bogus story of the Cadillac driving welfare queen was a gross exaggeration of a minor case of welfare fraud. MSNBC's Chris Matthews says the whole thing is racist malarkey, a coded reference to black indolence and criminality designed to appeal to working class whites. And the thing is, you didn't have to do much to demonize black people. They never even had to see this welfare queen. They never even had to see Linda Taylor. They just had to believe that it was black women. And that's the reason why this stereotype has lasted this long, because he was a likable figure and could tell stories, and that helped demonize us for decades. That is one of Ronald Reagan's lasting legacies. But people love him. They love him for whatever reason, even though the economy never trickled down, even though America was never great to go back to begin with, and even though he lied about the welfare queen trope. But Black women have always been a great target in a society that is both racist and sexist. And that's the reason why so many people are in the situation in this country that we're in now, because we became a target and no one deemed it necessary to protect us, even if we weren't doing anything. One woman, even if she had stolen $150,000, one woman stealing $150,000 doesn't mean that the next Black person living in poverty is stealing money. But that's how all of these poor white people came to think of Black people on welfare as stealing money. These racist stereotypes have lasted because these people wanted to believe them. They never wanted to get to know us on any kind of human level. And so now when they're snatching social safety nets, because Republicans have always wanted to snatch social safety nets, these people thought it was just going to be the lazy people, the criminals, the fraudsters getting their welfare benefits taken. And it's them too. It's them too. Had we not been a target, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation, but they chose to believe these racist stereotypes. All right, y'all, chime in. Let me know what you think about all of this. Drop your comments, like, comment, and share. If you're not following me over on YouTube, go ahead and follow me. I'm pushing towards 100,000 over there.